Good morning. We're continuing learning from the book Likuti Torah from the first Rebbe of Chabad, and we're learning a little bit about what is the spiritual implication, even deeper, the godly implication from this war that Moses was commanded to make against Midian. And why only Moses could do it. And this was the last thing that Moses was commanded to do before he died. It was decreed on him he wasn't going to go into the land of Israel. With the rest of the Jews, he would die before. And God said, before you die, as your last thing you're going to do in the world is make this war against Midian. So the Rebbe explains, well, excuse me one second. Exactly what is Midian? So he says Midian is hatred, dissension, discord. I want to call it bigotry. Bigotry is not such a good word. It's a very misused word. But anyway, hatred for no reason. Hatred that you just hate somebody because he's not you, or because it doesn't agree with you. Hatred. So the Rebbe, this thing of hatred was really what destroyed the second temple. That's why we're in exile for so long. And it really, in some ways, we're going to see that this is also essentially what destroyed the first temple as well. Because the Rebbe is going to explain that the only solution to this hatred and suspicion and division between people is the Torah. We're going to get to that, how it is. So first of all, we have to explain what is so bad about division. What's the problem with division? When everybody has to be the same. He says that exactly the opposite. Division comes from trying to make everybody the same. That's what divisions come from. Hatred. Hatred comes from trying to make everybody like you. And the opposite of division and hatred is harmony. You can also call it peace. But it's not peace in the sense that you neutralize the opposite. Peace is when there's two opposite things, and they both contribute one to the other. They harmonize. And each one has a place for the other one or appreciates the other one. And this, the Rebbe is going to say, can only come through the Torah. Why? Why the Torah? Of all things, why Torah? Why can't it come through some other means? Friendship, love, music, parties, right? They tried it so many times in all sorts of different ways. Right? Communism tried it, and then all these different conquerors tried it. They wanted to conquer the world. They figured then the world would be like one unified field. People tried it through drugs. It was in the 60s. They figured they'd do it through that way. And then they figured psychiatry will cure the ills of all mankind. There'll be peace, there'll be health. But all these things, they failed totally. But on the other hand, the Torah doesn't seem to have succeeded very much either. So what is the Rebbe talking about? Okay, so that's where we're at now. So the Rebbe wants to explain something to us. And this is what Judaism is here in the world to explain. And that is, what really is reality? What is reality? What is really real? So the Rebbe wants to say that the only thing that's really real in this world is God and the Torah. God and the Torah. So what do you mean? There's no world? What are we supposed to do with the world? So the Rebbe said that's exactly the point. The world is just aspects of God. And that's what we got up to now. This is an impossible idea to understand. It can only be grasped by what we call faith. But that doesn't lessen its importance, exactly the opposite. It can only be grasped by faith because that's the only organ, this only sensory organ, if you want to call it, that's capable of even dealing with such an infinite, massive idea, an incomprehensible idea. In other words, the only way to have real peace in the world is you have to go totally out of yourself and realize that yourself is being created by God. And God wants you to be unique and individual and separate. But it's not your doing, it's God's doing. So you can't impose your will on someone else. The fact that you're different and you're unique is not because of you. It's not, I am something special in my eyes. That's worth nothing. That I am something special in God's eyes, that's something. But then everybody is special in God's eyes. Everybody is unique in God's eyes. So the only way that I can really have peace with someone else is to try to look at things from God's point of view. Of course, that doesn't mean that there can't be wars and there can't be. Look at this book of Psalms. There was no one in history that had this point of view, that looked in the world from God's point of view more than King David. And look at the book of Psalms, you'll see that King David was always fighting with his enemies and running from his enemies and praying to God to save him from his enemies and to conquer his enemies and to destroy his enemies. So there still is free will and people can still do bad and you don't have to agree with bad. But you're not supposed to hate the person, you're supposed to hate the bad. Okay, so let's go back to the point over here. This, of course, needless to say, is not a simple thing. It's not that all of a sudden you get enlightened and that's it. You know, you're just spaced out. So what do we do? We have to try to look at the world from God's point of view. And the only one that can really do that is the Rebbe. So the Rebbe is trying to get us to understand how to look at the world from God's point of view, which you might think, I mean, that's ridiculous. We're not a Rebbe. We're not, that's the furthest thing from, but on the other hand, that's the purpose and the job of the Jews. And every Jew has this awareness somewhere deep in his soul. It's there. And we're supposed to imbue the whole world with this awareness because the same God that's creating us is creating everybody. And that's the job of Abraham. Abraham was called the father of all nations, Av Hamon Goyim. Avram, because he was supposed to teach all of the world this lesson on how not to be selfish. All the religions of the world are selfish. All of them. They're all selfish. And they're thinking, people are thinking only about themselves and how they can make everybody else think about themselves. To aggrandize themselves and their religion. We're trying to aggrandize God, the creator of the universe. Okay. So we're trying to look at the world from God's point of view because that's true reality. That's how we started the class. That's what reality is. The reality is this world is God's world. God is creating it. It is not our world. And when people look at it in that way, then the world is a different place. Then you realize that all of the gifts that you've got and your uniqueness, it has to be used according to the Torah. And when it is Jew and non-Jew, non-Jews had 7 Noahide commandments. When it's done in that way, then there's a peaceful world. Then life becomes precious. Every human being is a miracle. Every moment becomes a challenge, an opportunity. Because it's all God presenting us. God is incredibly, infinitely good. He's creating us. The problem is to look at the world from God's point of view. So that's what the Rebbe is trying to do. He's trying to get us to look at the world from God's point of view. Okay, so it says, the Torah is the secret to this peace. The Torah puts peace in what's called the upper family and the lower family. Pamilia shel Maila and Pamilia shel Mata. So what does this mean? So the Rebbe says the upper God's name, God is a name, right? God's got a lot of names, but God's main name is Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. That's God's name. Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. That's God's name. There's a lot of other names, but that's the main name of God. And this indicates God's relation to the world. Yud is what's called Chokhmah. Hey is Bina. Yud is Chokhmah. Hey is Bina. Vav are the emotions. The last Hey is what we call God's kingship, God's Malchut. Okay, so this is how God creates the world from nothing to something. We said the world, remember that's how we ended up last time. God creates the world from nothing to something. And the Rebbe said, what do you mean? How can God, the world is created from God? God is nothing. So he says, no, God, first of all, in order to create the world, he creates nothing. What's nothing? The letter Yud of his name. That's nothing. It's not a thing. It's what we call a tzimtzum. God contracted his reality to be a sort of a created, weird sort of reality. That's the letter Yud of God's name. And then from this Yud, that's the starting point. That's we call darkness. That's Chachma. It's incomprehensible. And from but it's a beginning. And from this nothing, from this darkness that God concealed over himself and contracted his light and hid himself, and from this can be created the upper world, Hey. That's the letter Hey. Okay, here we go. So it says, in order for God to make the world, Tzorech Liot, there has to be tzimtzum matzav, a tremendous contraction, a tremendous concealment, b'tchila, in the beginning, shea agiloi, that this revelation shall only be in a little ray, lavad alone, b'chtei, in order, sha'az then, yochal lidbiot b'chinat ha'arazu, this can be makor v'shoresh ha'yithavut, in order that this little point can be the source for the creation of all the worlds. Bali Gavul, limited. In other words, God is totally unlimited. Like we said before, saying that God is unlimited is sort of an insult to God, because God creates unlimited. Nevertheless, it's impossible from God's essence, so to speak, to create the world. Too powerful. It's like trying to put light in a house from taking all the power in the sea, right? 200 billion to the 200 billionth power of electricity, watts of electricity, and to put it into one room. Impossible, you can't do it. So what you have to do, you have to dim down the lights first. You have to put it in some sort of a transformer or whatever it's put into. And that process of, so to speak, God limiting his light to create the world, that is God's chachma. Sometimes in the Torah it's referred to by the word Bereshit, in the beginning. That's the beginning. Then after God has contracted his light, then Yochaliot, there can be ha'orazu, then this ray of godliness can actually start creating the worlds which are limited, v'shaloyid badlu, and that the world should not be negated in their existence. And that's the idea of the Yud. That's the Yud of God's name. Shehu b'chinas tzimtzum, which is a tremendous contraction, concealment, like it says, Yoshet Choshech Sitro, that God makes darkness his hiding place. In other words, God has to come down into this level of concealment in order to relate to the world. Now again, why are we learning all this? We're learning all this stuff that we can start to look at the world from God's point of view, and then we can appreciate the differences between each and every person, and there won't be this hatred, this boundless hatred for no reason. There's only just this little point. That's the level of chachma. The Yitzchak Barakitzo, and it comes out like a little flash. And then after this letter Yud, Nimshach, can then come the first Hey of God's name. Sheish bo orach varocha, that the letter Hey is not like the letter Yud. The letter Yud is just like a little point. The letter Hey, it's long and it's wide. This letter Hey, this is how it's coming from God's essence, is coming what's called how God surrounds the worlds and fills the worlds. Lamaila arein kates, above without any end. Lamata arein tachlit, coming down without any stopping. And there's this concept of up and down, closer to God, further from God. And the letter Yud, so to speak, that's God, as far as we can, any comprehension. Call this is drawn after Bechinas Yud. So the letter Yud, that's, so to speak, God himself. At least there's different Maimorim that they have used different metaphors. But in this, we're saying that letter Yud, that's, so to speak, God himself, how he has concealed himself and limited himself so that he can bring himself down to be relevant to create the world. Like we said, that's the Bereshit, that's in the beginning. That's the beginning. And from this come all these different aspects of God's light that surrounds the world and that fills the worlds and etc. And therefore, Nikra Beria, therefore the creation is called something from nothing. What do you mean from nothing? Because the source from which everything comes, namely this whole world, that's the letter Hey, comes by means of God makes himself into nothing. Mashu ayin v'kalo chashiv, that God makes himself into something incomparable, nothing compared to his essence. Shelamayla b'chinas tzimtzum zeh, which is above this contraction. So what do we have? We have God's essence, and then God somehow or other manipulates this essence and articulates this essence, you want to call it, and that's what's called God's essential severity. In order to make this letter Yud, and from the letter Yud, then it's relevant that there can be, this is only preparation, this is only the upper worlds, upper worlds, that there can be a creation, the potential of creation. And this potential is the letter Yud, is like nothing compared to God's essence. That's why the rabbis say, just like the creation of the world, in the beginning there's darkness. Right? And the simple meaning is that God created the world, there was darkness came before light. There was night and there was day one day. But here the Rebbe is saying, no, that's the way it is. In the whole creation, the whole entire creation of all of the worlds, of all time and all space and etc. First of all, there's darkness. What does it mean, darkness? That God, so to speak, brought himself down from his total infiniteness, which is, that's, like I say, infiniteness is not it's like an insult to God. Whatever he did, he contracted himself that there can be this letter Yud. And the letter Yud, that's infiniteness. That's infinity. It's totally incomprehensible, this letter Yud, but nevertheless, that's why it's called darkness. Nevertheless, that is the beginning, the seed for the creation of the whole world. Okay, one reason we're talking about this is to let us know how far we are from reality, how far our perspective of the world is from the truth. We see everything from our point of view. And it's a totally, how do you say, it's a total misconception. But on the other hand, God created the world that we're very, how do you say, culpable to have this misconception, right? He created the world in such a way that we wouldn't understand it. We couldn't understand it. And that's why we need great leaders. We need Moses, why we needed Abraham. That's why the world needs Abraham, to educate the whole world. That's what it says in the beginning of the Song of Songs. Shir Hashem Shchor Ani, I am black, but I am beautiful. This is talking about the letter Yud of God's name that hasn't got any color, any whiteness. Bahadar, and then afterwards, first of all, there's darkness, and then Hadar Nahora, afterwards there's light. This is the letter Hey of God's name. This thing of God contracting himself and God revealing himself, the Yud and the Hey, these are two opposites. There has to be something that joins these two opposites together. And what is this two opposites that join the two opposites together? This is a level which is above both of them. That this comes directly from God himself. that is the Creator Himself. To convey that before God, by God, the letter Yud and the letter Hey, darkness, light, revelation, concealment, it's all the same thing. Darkness and light is the same. That's the essence of God we talked about. And that's going to be the secret of peace. That makes this letter, this essence of God, it unites the letter Yud and the letter Hey, the nothingness and the somethingness. Because darkness and light, this is only relevant in the creation of the world. Of a kodem shenivra olam, but before the world was created, and that still exists now. That's real, true reality. Lo shayach b'chinas elu. It's not relevant, these levels. Al yedem shachar b'chinas zu. And from this, yochel liot, there can be kesher v'chibur, there can be a joining bein shtei avchim, these two opposites. Ad until shebechina, at the level of chachma and bina, like we said, Yud and Hey, the Yud and the Hey become Trei Rein, they become two friends. The Olam is parshin, that they're not separated. What's it like? It's like, let's say you have two bitter enemies in the government, and when the king appears, or let's say when there's a war, and there's two generals that oppose one another, but then the king appears, and they says, listen, if you're going to have these battles in the government, as I'm going to have to get rid of one of you, I can't, in the army. So all of a sudden they make friends. For one common purpose, they make friends. But common purpose has to be above both of them. So it's the same thing as with the world. The world in its nature is diversity. God wants there to be diversity. But how can this diversity get along together? How can it be? For instance, the angel of Mechoel, that's the source of water, that's of love. The angel Gabriel, that's the source of fire. Fire and water don't get along together. Either the fire puts out it evaporates the water, or the water puts out the fire. They can't be water and fire together. How can it possibly be? This is when there's something higher, the creator of both of them appears, then anything can happen. Anything can happen. It says that's what, if we can just connect ourselves somehow or other to the creator of this whole entire business, of the whole Yud and the Hey and the whole thing, and afterward, after all, there is nothing except for God. That God hides himself, it doesn't mean that God's not there. He just hides his revelation. So that there's upper worlds and lower worlds and spiritual worlds and physical worlds and heaven and earth and all this is all part of the creation. If we can reveal the creator in the creation, then that unifies not just the heavens and the earth, but we're going to see also all the things on the earth itself. That's going to be the lower unity, the lower family. This is when the essence of God is revealed, and we're going to see that's by means of the Torah. We're going to see. Even though Shein Be'etzem, they're two opposites, and then they're called nothing and something. But if there is revealed, or they feel the essence of God by means of Amshachah or and so by means of them being drawn down, the light of God, Shalom, which is above these two opposites, they become united and one. This is this higher level than the Yud is hinted at by the little point on the top of the letter Yud. Shula which is much, much above Mibechinat Yud, which is much higher than the letter Yud itself. What's this point on the top of the Yud? Here we can see something like that. You see this letter here. Let's look at the letter Vav. Here we can see this here. If you block out the bottom part of the Vav, you have a Yud. On the top of the Yud, there's a little point. See up here, little point over there. That little point, that is also part of the Yud. That represents what's sometimes called Keter, crown. That's the crown on the top. This represents the aspect of, and that's of course the Yud is the first letter of God's name. But the Yud is only a letter of God's name. It's an aspect of God. But the little point on the top of it, that shows on the God himself, the essence of God that creates this whole business. In the Yud, there are 3 points. Umikotza tachton, from the lower point, is drawn down the Hey. And in this lower point, Yesh Bechinas Kotza Elyon, there is also an upper point. I'll show you what this means. So it comes out Zem Mishpashet, the Yotze Hayud into the Hey. Is Nimshach also Kutzo Shel Yud, which is Lamaila, Maila from the essence of the letter Yud. Okay, let's go. What's going on over here? Look. If you can see the letter Yud, it's hard to see. You have to make a Yud. Where can we find the letter Yud over here? All right, we'll have to take one of these here. See, maybe we can make this bigger, huh? Let's see if we can get a Yud over here. Oh, there we go. See, there's a Yud. Oh, one more. Not too big. Oh, here we go. There we go. Here we got a Yud. A Yud. So we got a point over here, a point over here. Let's do it over here. Here, a point over here on the bottom, a point over here on the top. And there's also a point over here. I hope this pointer is coming through. There's also a point over there. So after the letter Yud, there's 3 points. This one, and this one, right? This point. It says that's the letter, this point over here, that's the furthest one over there, that comes into the Hey. So let's see if we can go back and understand this. Not too much. There we go. Okay, so it comes out when this Yud unites with the Hey. Why does it do it? Because there's this little point on the top of the Yud that comes down. And that is revealed. That's what unites these two opposites together of nothing and something, Chachma and Bina. Okay, something like this, we can give an example maybe of a healthy person. A healthy person has all these opposing forces going on in his body. You got your brain and you have your heart, especially. Let's take these two especially, the brain and the heart. The brain is very cold and very, I say it's quiet, doesn't move around at all. And the heart is very warm and it's moving all the time, right? Now, how can these two function in the same body? I mean, the body, is it warmer? So the answer is because there's life and the person is alive and he's healthy. So everything flows and there's a place for everything. The brain contributes its thing and the heart contributes its thing, but whatever it is. When a person gets too hot or too cold, or if the heart doesn't work properly or the brain doesn't work properly, right? Then the person has problems. Why? Because life is not being revealed. When life is being revealed, then all of the organs, doesn't make a difference how opposite they are, the eyes and the ears and the mouth. If life is revealed, then everything works properly. But when life is not revealed, then everything becomes separate. And that's what the Rebbe is saying over here. God creates the world. And in the world, there's always all this diversity. Why? Because as soon as God starts creating the world, he himself, so to speak, becomes diverse. God himself, so to speak, becomes divided up. Of course, God forbid to say anything like that, but that nevertheless, it's true. Nevertheless, it's true. God becomes, so to speak, divided up. We have Chachma, we have Bina. Chachma, in order for, they're two opposites. In order for them to come in together, there has to be a third thing, so to speak, that unites them. But the Rebbe is trying to say, no, it's not the fact is, third thing that unites them is really not a third thing. The third thing that unites them is the Creator that creates them both. That's the whole idea that a person learns, when the person learns Torah, Masim Shalom b'Pamil Yishamayla. When a person learns Torah, he puts peace in the upper worlds, in the upper family. What causes that there can be the essence of God being drawn into the world to join together this Yudeh? What is it that makes this health in the world? How is it that the world can be totally healthy so that all of the opposites all work together? Because a person is different from you, you'll value him more. I just saw this thing, the thing about limiting world population. There's too many people in the world. So even the people that think this is a crazy idea, but they say, but the people in Africa, there I can understand. Understand. I mean, that's like really sick. I mean, what you're essentially saying is that is that I'm the boss. I'm saying who should be created, who should not be created. It's death worship. It's death worship. Life is something that makes everything work together in the body. Same thing, the life force of the world, everything works together in the body. Right? It's like saying cut off a person's toes or cut off a person's left eye because it doesn't look like, right? Looks in the wrong direction. So it doesn't make any sense. But on the other hand, how can there be a part inside of me for everybody in the world? So the answer is there can't be unless I connect to something which is totally above me. But if it's totally above, how can I connect to it? So it says, don't worry about it. God already made the connection. He put the Torah in the world. And when a Jew learns the Torah, believe it or not, even though we don't see when a person learns Torah, that all of a sudden big beams of light come down and shine on him, not anybody else. And exactly the opposite. Because of learning Torah, it could be that you get into trouble. We saw all these Jews got killed in the Holocaust and things like that because they were religious and they learned Torah, or because they were Jews and other Jews learned Torah. Because the Torah kept Judaism going. If there wouldn't have been any Judaism, there wouldn't be any Holocaust, right? So, but the fact is the Jews are eternal and the Torah is always eternal. And the Jews are there to put good in the world. If there weren't any Jews, then Hitler would be he'd be God. The power of destruction, everybody would just destroy everybody else. And they enjoy it. The ones that were alive anyway. Until there was nobody left to destroy, then I don't know what they would do. So the purpose of the Jews is supposed to be to learn the Torah, utilize in the proper way, to utilize the Torah, and that brings peace into the world, believe it or not. Who would believe that that's the secret to world peace? And then it's not communism, and it's not socialism, and it's not whatever it is, Nazism, and it's not all these other isms that everybody says is the world, new world order or whatever. But who al yedei Torah? That's the Torah. That's why the Holy Temple, the essence of the Holy Temple, and is the Torah. That's the main thing of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is supposed to be the city of peace because it has the Torah. That's what it's supposed to be. The Torah can also be a source of hatred. Also, the Torah can be misused. All of King David's enemies were all religious Jews, very religious Jews, very knowledgeable Jews in the Torah. So just because you learn the Torah automatically fixes you up. If you learn it, fixes you up 10%, 20%. The rest you have to do yourself. That's what it means. Yaseh shalom. Li shalom li. Mamash. Hainu, one of the prophets. Hainu, b'bechinas Yud-K. That's the letter Yud. Yud-K, that the name of God. Hatam, and the reason is because Araisa, the Torah, comes from God's Chacham. What does it mean? The Torah comes out from this letter of Yud. Anyone who reads the Torah as God reads opposite. This is the point on the top of the Yud. When a Jew learns the Torah, God actually reacts. He reacts and he learns Torah opposite you. In Kenef, so Mamshech Shiyah Kodesh Baruch Hu, that God, that's the essence Ein Sof Baruch Hu. When you learn the Torah, Nimshach, it draws God himself, the essence of God that creates this Yud in the name, not God's name, but the essence of God comes down and is clothed in the Torah that comes from God's wisdom. V'zeu osek b'Torah, that's what it's called, osek b'Torah. But the catch is that you have to learn the Torah in the proper way. You have to learn for the sake of the Torah itself, for the sake of God. V'gam lishmo, for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of the Torah and for the sake of Hashem. In other words, you're not learning the Torah for yourself. You're not learning the Torah to be great and to be wise and to be respected and to be honorable and to have a good position and to have your name in the papers and all those things. Those things are not bad. You can have them, but it's not a goal. Those things are supposed to ensue. It comes as a side product of your genuineness. And if it doesn't come, it's not so bad also. It's okay. God does what he wants to. The biggest tzaddikim, it says, are the hidden ones that nobody knows about. They're the ones that keep the world going. As much as the world is going. By means of this, there's the joining of the letters Yud K. That's learning Torah. So it's so tremendously important to learn the Torah. And if you don't know what that means, then simply go to your local Chabad house, and maybe they'll make you a partner to learn Torah with, or go to the local yeshiva and have some young man learn Torah with, or you pay him money to learn Torah with you. All the boys in the yeshivas, they need money. And therefore, Nikrat's Torah is called peace. That's why the Torah is called peace. In the parentheses, because my means of this is drawn down, this quotes Elyon, the upper point of the letter Yud, we said. The Torah comes from this level of Chachma, and its source comes from a level which is above Chachma. It just comes out from Chachma. Like a person's mouth speaks, but the source is much higher. It says because the 613 commandments and the 7 commandments of the rabbis, this is what's called a Keter Tarach. That's 620. 620. That's Keter, the crown. That's God's will, which is clothed in the Torah. That comes from the essence of God. That's 200. It makes 620 pillars of light that joins the highest worlds with the lowest worlds. So believe it or not, when you learn the Torah, you might think that it's just an interesting pastime and it's wonderful. It's our heritage and it's very deep and it's other. But this is the Torah. This is actually the Torah of God. It's the only the only book in the world written by God himself. God, the creator of the universe, actually wrote this book, every single word of it. It's not written by an inspired man that wrote it. That's also a wonderful idea, but it's not written by inspired word, even if it's true. I mean, the other religions, they say it's true. Who knows how true it is, right? But even if they were inspired, let's say that these people were inspired to make these other religions, and there's tens, hundreds, thousands of other religions by other people. There's all these branches and sub-branches, and they claim by people who claim that they spoke to the Lord, and the Lord told them, and they found whatever it is, they found the scroll and the hidden scroll and this. The Torah was given, every single letter of it was given by God, and the same Torah that God gave back then is the same Torah we have now. The Jews gave their lives to preserve the Torah. And when we read the Torah, we are actually awakening the will, the essence of God in the world. That's why God gave the Torah. When we understand the Torah, who would dream that this is true? But it is true. And that sort of maybe explains the reason for anti-Semitism, that people hate peace. They hate peace. They make up all sorts of excuses. The Jews have the money. The Jews are the ones trying to make the wars. The Jews are destroying the world. Who said the Jews are destroying the world? The Nazis. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And the Jews, they're the thieves. Who said how much the art and the treasures that the Germans stole? Incredible. They robbed everybody, killed everybody, and they tried to pin it on the Jews. The Jews are the problem with everything. But why is it people pin it on the Jews? Because really, the Jews are the secret of world peace. When the Jews learn the Torah, they're the secret of world peace. Jews that don't learn the Torah, it's like it can be like a wild horse, it's just not harnessed energy. But if they do learn the Torah and they learn the Torah properly with a proper attitude, and it's true, there's a lot of conditions being made over here, but that's the solution to the world's problems, says the Rebbe. And that's one of the main things of Mashiach, is that he's going to bring all of the Jews back to learning the Torah. And that's what the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, is doing. Bringing all the Jews back to learning the Torah. As we'll continue more, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's learn the Sikha that we began yesterday.